On this edition of Independent Sources, what's in a name? The debate over the terms Hispanic or Latino. Why is the community in the United States split over which word better describes them culturally and ethnically?
Nourishing New York. Why are many of the Korean greengrocers that once lined the streets of New York's neighborhoods disappearing?
And Healing Haiti, a program to help Haitians still struggling with the mental trauma brought on by the earthquake that devastated their country. Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre.
And I'm Abi Ishola. Here in the U.S., we often use the words Hispanic and Latino interchangeably to describe people from Spanish-speaking countries. However, there's a pretty heated debate going on among some groups in the community who say both terms are flawed.
On one side, there are those who say that Hispanic refers only to people from Spain and angers those who do not want to identify with their colonizers. On the other hand, there are those who prefer the phrase Latino, a term they feel reflects more of the community's ethnic and cultural diversity.
Producer Marlene Peralta sat down with sociologist Segundo Pantoja and journalist Ed Morales to talk about the origin of the terms and the great debate in the community.
Thank you both for being here today. We're going to start with Segundo. Segundo, the term Hispanic and Latino is often used at the same time, and some people prefer one over the other. What's the difference between the two terms?
Well, the difference is like in many other things, it depends on the beholder. The beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. I think the term Hispanic is older in terms of its currency and acceptance and usage. And the term Latino is relatively new. Even though it may have been invented, it has not gained currency as the Hispanic sense. So nowadays we are familiarized with two terms that are in usage, and for the practical purposes, they are interchangeable. Even though behind the labels or behind these terms, there is a lot of discussion that has been going on and that still can take place. But basically, I would say that the term Hispanic emphasizes roots to a particular country and origin and a particular aspect of cultural language, whereas the term Latino makes more emphasis on the connection to Latin America and the mixture of races and cultures. So that if you want to dig deeper into these terms, you can get a lot of thought and thinking about. But the two terms have their history, but I'd say the Hispanic is older and the Latino is more recent.
Ed, in New York City, there seems to be a preference for the term Latino over Hispanic. Why the rejection for the Hispanic term? Well,
I'm not sure, but it's probably has something to do with politics and racial identification. Segundo pointed out that Latino implies a direct racial identification with a mixture of races. And New York Latinos tend to be more politically to the left or liberal, and Latino is the term that's favored by liberals because it implies an association with Latin America. And Latin America can be seen as unified by the fact that it became an object of U.S. political ambition and intervention since the Monroe Doctrine in the 19th century.
And so you're saying that pretty much people who are, let's say, Republicans may identify more as Hispanic over Democrats identifying as Latino? Could that be true?
It's not absolutely true, but I think that there's more of a tendency in that way. Also because Hispanic kind of offers an easier way to be classified as an ethnic group rather than as a racial group. And identifying with a racial group is sort of goes contradictory to Republican atmosphere, you know, unless of course you're African American, in which you have no choice to identify with a certain racial group.
And Segundo, would you say that we get different answers when it comes to whether or not you're Latino or Hispanic because there's a division within the community, or it's just a matter of what kind of, I guess, generation you belong to?
You are pointing to important aspects. I think division is a very strong word. I think the community is not divided about the labels on the way. Of course, there is a sort of division in the sense that in reality, most people who can, with pride, look back to an ancestry in Latin America or the Caribbean, they are going to tend to prefer a national term, a term that associates them with a particular country. That's the preference. When it comes to choosing between Hispanic and Latino, you don't see much of a division. It's a matter of preference that may be related to the question of generation. I think it's more common to find in younger people their identification or the use of the term Latino rather than in the older generation. So people who are probably, let's say, aging, or in the 50s and 60s people, these persons tend to prefer the Hispanic, probably because of the familiarity over the years. No? After hearing it so much, Hispanic seems to be like the most acceptable for a particular generation. But Latino has gained so much currency that probably the younger generation tends to feel more comfortable with. Without understanding, without understanding all the ideological baggage behind that. Because I understand that there is ideology behind, but not everybody can afford to deal with that ideology.
But what about the association of the term Hispanic to white people, as you know, opposed to a more diverse community? Because a lot of people have said that that's why they choose Latino over Hispanic, because Hispanic doesn't include.
I understand, and there is the possibility that there is a connection in terms of racial preference, you know, with the label. But I think it may be more subconscious than consciously. But because I think there is a tradition in the United States to using the hyphenated labels.
Yes.
So that the Hispanic American is something that is more used. You can come across the Hispanic American, and that I see it as many people can interpret it as that we are closer to being American, full Americans, rather than Latino. Latino doesn't lend itself to this Latino American. Rarely you find somebody using the term Latino American, you see? So Latinos tend to be more like a definite, a sense of closure to the discussion. We are Latinos, not hyphenated. Yeah.
Okay, Ed, what's your take on that?
Well, that all those things are true, but there are two ironies associated with the Hispanic that don't fit into what we're talking about here. And one is that Hispano, the term Hispano in Spanish, was used by many Hispanics or Latinos who lived in New York in the early part of the 20th century. So many of whom were in labor unions and who used the term as a way of having solidarity with other Spanish-speaking immigrants, so that, you know, this is before the Nixon administration started using Hispanic, which is now what we consider the more modern or postmodern use of the word. The other thing is that identifying with Spain, for me, I mean, in the research that I've done, does not necessarily mean identifying strictly with whiteness, because Spain itself, the whiteness of Spain was in question by the rest of Europe for much of the birth of the Western Europe idea, and you know, many of much of the Spanish blood that we may actually have may have belonged to many Muslim or Jewish or other dark-skinned adventurers who left Spain because Spain had the Inquisition and was in the process of casting out many of those people. So in fact, much of our Spanish blood may actually not be white in that sense.
Well, it all comes to the diversity that we have in, you know, so many different countries whose language is Spanish. Would there ever be a consensus? Would Latino take over for Hispanic, or would we see the two terms used years from now?
Well, I sort of feel that, you know, it's so institutionally embedded in our consciousness, and also it's not only politically, but, you know, another big reason for the use of any term that groups Latinos or Hispanics together is advertising. And that's really in effect. And, you know, it's kind of an interplay between, you know, the people who are interested in labeling you, and then you as a Hispanic or Latino, trying to identify yourself or define yourself. So that tension will go on, I think.
What do you think?
Yes, I think the terms are historically rooted, and they have come into existence at a particular moment, and they have been evolving. And I see the situation is very fluid, because somehow it represents or tries to catch, you know, a particular group of people that is continuously in movement. Latinos are growing in numbers, are diversifying in terms of their composition, and they are spreading throughout the United States. So that the labels are going to be, you know, with us for a long time, and I think it would be premature, you know, to say that this debate is going to end or that people are going to adopt one over the other. I think at every moment we must be able to try to understand the situation. But for now, I think it's better to have two than one. So having two labels, for me, is probably better than to have just one. Because when I am writing, for example, I get tired of writing Hispanic and one, and so I
agree.
So I use it interchangeably, aware of the whole discussion behind it, but for practical purposes, I think that they are interchangeable.
We have to leave it at that. Thank you, Segundo Pantoja, Ed Morales, for being here with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come on independent sources. Where have all the Korean greengrocers gone?
Before that, Jessica Courtemanche has some other news.
Thanks, Abby. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic media. A Long Island woman was arrested for running a Ponzi scheme on New York City Hispanics, according to El Diario La Prensa. Ibis Febles conned 31 people into investing in a real estate corporation by promising them that they would receive lucrative returns. The victims lost a total of $1.3 million. Febles was arrested in Puerto Rico and brought back to New York. She faces up to 15 years in prison. The Manhattan Times reports that parents are being schooled on identifying and preventing gang activity. The Manhattan DA's office and the 34th Police Precinct held a workshop called Gangs 101 at PS 152 Dyckman Valley School in Washington Heights. According to the paper, officials urged the parents to become more involved and vigilant in their children's lives. The Manhattan District Attorney said that there has been an increase of violent crimes in the last year, many of which involve suspects who are 18 or younger. From the Irish Central, 4 teenagers from Northern Ireland were part of a group of teenagers who came to New York to share their experiences after surviving terrorist attacks. The teens were brought to the city by a nonprofit group called One Heart Global. Its mission is to help the victims of terrorism. As part of their trip, the group met with Police Commissioner Ray Kelly and visited Ground Zero. The Amsterdam News reports that New York City officials are challenging the results of the 2010 U.S. Census. Officials are saying that there was a miscount, that the numbers are actually higher, and they worry that the city's financial resources will be shortchanged as a result. According to the newspaper, one of the most baffling results is a 0.1% increase in population in Queens, which would mean that the borough only had about 1,300 new residents in the last 10 years. The census lists a population of 8.175 million in New York City, but City Hall estimates that the number is closer to 8.4 million. And finally, from Brooklyn to Tennessee, Carib News reports that the principal of PS 257 John F. Highland School for the Performing Arts serenaded his students as they prepared for a school trip to Tennessee. Brian Duvall sang Mark Cohen's Walking in Memphis to his students, 18 of whom are going on the trip as part of an after-school enrichment program. The Young Leaders program is aimed at high-achieving 4th and 5th grade students. Those were just a few headlines from the ethnic media. Back to Garry and Abi in the studio.
Thanks, Jessica. One report from the Korean Produce Association says that its membership has decreased from 3,000 to 2,500 over the last few decades. Another author claims the numbers have fallen even further to 1,500. Though the figures differ, one thing is certain: Korean greengrocers in New York and New Jersey are disappearing.
So why is this happening? I sat down with City Journal contributor Laura Vanderkam to talk about why a generation of entrepreneurs who nourished New York for several decades are packing up and leaving. Laura, recently you published an article in City Journal, and headline was, "Where did the Korean greengrocers go?" I will start this interview by asking you that same questions. Where did they go?
Well, what happened in New York is a two-part story. The number of Korean greengrocers has declined quite a bit over the past 20 or so years. First, New York has become less amenable to small retail generally. You've noticed we have so many chain stores here now. We have The Gap, we have Starbucks, Walmart's even coming. So the city is really, all the retail space is being picked over by chains. So that's one reason that there are fewer Korean greengrocers. But a bigger one is more a story of economic success. Many Korean immigrants came to this country not speaking much English and so facing barriers in the labor market, and they responded by opening their own businesses. And some of these businesses did reasonably well, or at least supported them well enough that they could then invest a lot of resources in their children, to the point where their children are not taking over these businesses. They're becoming doctors and lawyers and civil servants, things like that.
And so who's replacing these Korean greengrocers? Because, I mean, if you live in the city, there isn't a shortage of greengrocers per se. It's just like they're not being run by Koreans.
That's true. There's some decline overall in smaller merchants. But, you know, some are being taken over by the next wave of immigrants. People from the Middle East or Africa or other countries.
Mexican?
The Mexicans, some. But, you know, the Koreans were the wave that was before that. And before that, you had Italian families, Jewish families. It's been a progression that's gone through the grocery business.
So it's just like the first step in acculturation in the city?
Well, hopefully. That's the way it's supposed to work, right? Is that people come to New York, figure out something they can do to support themselves and their families, and the grocery business has always been very attractive for that. You don't have to speak a whole lot of English to run a grocery store. You don't need a whole lot of money to start one up. So those factors have made it attractive to immigrant communities for decades. So that's what you saw with that.
What's happening with the Korean community? What are most of these greengrocers, what are they doing? You talked about the next step. What is that for them?
Well, for the people who actually ran the groceries, I mean, some are retiring, they're getting older, they're going into other lines of work. There's certainly a lot of nail salons that are owned by Korean immigrants in New York. Or just moving into other professions. And even as they're retiring, they're selling their businesses to other new immigrants or closing them up.
Well, when you think about the Korean greengrocers, they, like other immigrants who've worked in inner city New York, they've had a lot of problems with the community, and the Korean has their share of problems. Let's talk a little bit about the problems that they had with the boycott they had in the 1990s, early 1990s, and how they were able to resolve that.
Well, there were definitely a series of boycotts through the 1980s into the early 1990s. A lot of racial tensions that Korean immigrants came and opened stores in what were predominantly African-American neighborhoods, and there was some tension with that. And there was a lot of negative opinions on both sides. I quote some research from a Queens College professor who found that, you know, Korean shop owners had very negative impressions of their black customers.
They thought they were thieves.
They thought they were shoplifting. They would follow them around the stores, not hire them as workers, thinking that other Koreans or Latinos would be better workers. So some definitely negative impressions. And then the African-American community had negative impressions too. I mean, surveys finding that they believed that Koreans were overly concerned with making money or only concerned with other Koreans. So
one thing that I read was that they wouldn't give the change in a hand as you're supposed to. They'll just throw it
across the counter. There were definitely some incidents of unfortunate, you know, racial tensions in New York, and that culminated in this series of boycotts, some of which went on for quite a long time. And some of those stores did survive. The Korean community really rallied around them, contributed money to help keep them open. And there were, I think, a lot of negotiations going on too. But things have changed a lot in New York, and that's one of the reasons that you just don't see those tensions so much anymore. I mean, different neighborhoods of New York have become more diverse. I mean, a place like Harlem, you know, we think of it as a historically African-American neighborhood, but it's quite diverse these days. Yes, it's become not so much. And so, you know, some of the activists had signs saying, don't shop from people who don't look like us. But who is us anymore in many of these neighborhoods?
Well, one of the big activists was Sonny Carson, who I think has since passed away. You know, one of the things that the Koreans did, they had some issues in the Haitian community, and they started to learn a little bit of Creole, and I think that kind of helped diffuse the tension. What else did they do to deal with the problem?
Well, certainly that's one thing. I mean, just getting to know your customers is a great way to realize that everyone just wants to shop and buy their groceries. The smartest entrepreneurs would get involved in community organizations, would make sure that they hired people from the local area instead of just, you know, friends from the Korean community. So really making progress that way.
Again, what's next for that community? I mean, we don't hear that much about them. We haven't heard too much about the Korean American community outside of greengrocers. Is it because they're being so much part of the mainstream America that we don't hear much about them? That's
really part of it. There's been some research that, at least economically, Korean Americans are pretty much indistinguishable from white Americans. And so many have achieved great success in America. Their children are participating in more mainstream lines of work between, you know, medicine, law, civil service, becoming professors, or if they own businesses, they start businesses that people who are more comfortable in a culture might start. So things that don't need to kick off cash immediately, things that can rely a little bit more on interpersonal interaction instead of, you know, if you don't know the language.
Now, there are a lot of businesses I suppose they could have gone into. Why the grocery business? Why was it so appealing to them?
Well, it was one of several that that they did go into. I mean, there's obviously lots of, you know, laundromat, dry cleaners, nail salons, things like that. The appeal of the grocery business is that it's really cheap to start up. I mean, especially if you're willing to hang a shingle in a neighborhood that's a lot of other merchants are fleeing, which was certainly the case in the 1970s and 1980s when the bulk of Korean immigration occurred. So that made it very attractive. You really only needed a few $1,000s to open a store. And then unlike many other businesses, you'd start getting revenue very fast. I mean, you start a business now in many other kinds of businesses, it could be a year before you see any real revenue or profits. And that's just not the case with a grocery store because people are shopping there all the time.
Thank you very much, Laura.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
When we come back, an attempt to help members of the Haitian community still suffering from the scars of 2010's massive earthquake.
My name's Reggie. Just recently, my wife and I took in her sister's children. Now, we already had 4, so I went from becoming a family man to a man with a bigger family. Now, you can't eat love, so I don't know how I'm gonna feed them tonight. How was that, Rich?
I think I look more like Denzel.
That's cold, man.
Play a role in ending hunger. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger and find your local food bank.
Finally tonight, after the devastating earthquake ripped through Haiti, countless foreign aid groups flocked to the country to help provide food and medical attention.
Dr. James Gordon, a psychiatrist and director of the Center for Mind-Body Medicine, decided to use his expertise to educate Haitians on how to heal themselves and each other from the emotional trauma they experienced.
And when the music begins,
la musique a commencé,
begin to shake.
nous allons commencer shake.
Okay.
This shaking exercise is one part of the work Dr. James Gordon is doing in Haiti. The licensed psychiatrist went to the Caribbean nation 1 year after thousands were killed or left homeless by the devastating earthquake that ripped through the region in 2010. Experts say Haitians are now suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome with barely any resources to help correct the widespread issue.
There are maybe half a dozen psychiatrists in Haiti, PhD psychologists, a handful, psychologists with a master's degree, maybe 20. and maybe a couple hundred who have bachelor's degrees. So there really is no mental health system in Haiti at all.
His strategy to help fix the problem: teach health professionals how to heal themselves and their fellow countrymen. It's a method he and his staff at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine have been using in war-torn countries for over a decade. This time, the group taught 120 Haitians techniques like meditation and breathing to calm the nervous system. He also shows participants how to use their imagination to draw pictures of how they're feeling. The shaking exercise is just one method of teaching them how to free up their bodies through physical movement. He estimates that the first group of trainees will go on to work with about 20,000 people during the course of the year.
One of the terrible things about trauma is that often all the emotions are shut down. So there are people who lost family members who have not cried in a year. And they come to the training and they're able to let go and cry, and they're able to feel like they're at home in their bodies again.
They're basically, saw the initials, PTSD. They're basically 3 sets of symptoms.
The Washington, D.C.-based doctor came to New York recently to talk about his efforts in Haiti. He also demonstrated his techniques to Haitians and non-Haitians who attended. The popular self-help guru and author, Dr. Deepak Chopra, hosted the event at his headquarters at ABC Carpet in Manhattan.
I'm a great admirer of his work. I have explored the relationship between mind, body, and spirit and the environment for 2 decades, and I can think of no one who's taken that exploration and made it reach large groups of people.
Haitian-American actor Jamie Hector, best known for his work on HBO's The Wire, came to support Dr. Gordon's teachings.
I've never been to Haiti, but my parents are from Haiti, so, seeing your parents and your mother and your brothers and your sisters cry, it affects you.
One drawback for the evening, only a handful of Haitians showed up. Terrie Williams, who owns the public relations agency that represents the Center for Mind-Body Medicine, says she can't explain why more people from the community didn't attend.
Several black newspapers did run information, and we had flyers that were disseminated within the Haitian community. I don't know what to say about that. That's all. But the effort was very much made because we really wanted to give them tools to heal themselves and to pass on to their relatives.
Dr. Gordon was happy to see some Haitians in the room, and he hopes he and his team will have the opportunity to work more with the Haitian diaspora. For now, their primary focus is to continue to help heal the people of Haiti, where he and his team hope to train up to 2,000 people. For Independent Sources, Abi Ishola.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned.
Until next time, stay independent-minded.